Welcome to episode 3 in the Learning to Code MTA series. Today we're going to diverge from scripting for a moment and talk about something that is very, very useful when you're creating your own server, and that is Git. Git is a command line tool. You can download an interface for it, but essentially what it does is it allows you to record changes that you're making to your repository. What that means is every time you make a change in your server, it will record that change, and then you can tell it why you're making that change, and it will keep track of everything for you. This is also incredibly useful when you have more than one person working on a project. If you have 2 or 3 developers working on the same server, the changes need to be coming back into the same code base so that we can push that up to our live instance that players are actually playing on without overwriting each other's changes. So let's dive into an example. In episode 2, I gave you a little bit of homework. I asked you to set up rotation on a vehicle so that when we restarted our server, the vehicle's rotation didn't always get set back to dead north. Let's take a look at how we actually implemented that. I've created this MTA tutorial resource on GitHub, and this is our Git repository. Now you can see here there's commits. If I look into the commits, I can see all of the commits that I have done to this repository, all of the changes that I've made so far. And here we see added vehicle rotation support. If I click here, I can see exactly how to add the vehicle's rotation support. And this is what your solution should have looked like if you followed along and did the homework. If not, what you can do is you can just view this file here, and you can grab the necessary changes that you need and implement those in your resource, and good to go. So how do you actually create your own GitHub repository, and how do you use it? The first step is going to be getting Git itself installed on your computer. Now you can go to something called Git SCM, and gitscm.com has a download page that you can use to download for Windows. So we'll go ahead and grab that. Once it's downloaded, we'll open it up. All right, so let's go through the configuration for this together. The first steps here, let's not worry too much about these. The defaults are probably going to be fine. Here, we're going to choose the editor that Git will use when we want to change a commit message or something like that. Now, I recommend using anything other than Vim. Notepad++ and Visual Studio Code are both great examples. If you have either of those installed, I recommend using them. If you don't have them installed, then you can download them. Here, we're going to choose whether or not we want to use Git from a Git bash, which is something that Git will install so that we can use Git on their own command line, whether we want to use it from the Windows command prompt, or whether we want to use it in the Windows command prompt and install a bunch of Linux default commands as well. So we're just going to go with option number 2. It's the simplest and most straightforward system to use. Here we're just going to leave the default and use the OpenSSL library. Don't worry too much about this. Now, how we check out for a Windows machine, we definitely want to check out Windows style so that our Windows programs know what they're doing. And we want to commit Unix style line endings so that Git itself can handle those better. For this, that'll be the best option. Next, we're going to choose to use the Windows default console window as we did before when we said we wanted to use Git from the Windows command line and not from Minty or the Git bash window. So we're going to choose option number 2. And then we'll leave all 3 of these guys enabled. They're just things that Git will use to help us out in working with files. And then you're going to go ahead and click install. I'm going to cancel out here because I already have Git installed. So you click install, go through, and then we'll jump over to our terminal. So now that you have Git installed, you're going to go ahead and just type Git. Now Git has a whole bunch of commands. The first ones that we're going to be concerned with are clone and init. So if you wanted to clone an existing repository that exists, for example, mine right here, you could come to github.com/dlet/mta tutorial and click this clone button right here and just grab this clone with SSH URL. Jumping back over to your terminal, just go to the directory that you want to clone it into and run git clone and then that URL. it will clone it into a directory, and then you can cd into that directory. And you have everything that was committed. Now, if you jump back out and let's create another directory called my MTA server. You make a directory with makedir. And let's jump into my MTA server. And if you have a directory here that you already have stuff in, you can initialize it as a Git repository by doing git init. So now you have a Git repository here. You can check the status of your Git repository and do all sorts of different Git commands to interact with your Git repository. So the first thing that you're going to need to do if you've created a Git repository through git init for yourself is go ahead and create a remote repository on GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever your choice is so that you can attach it up to a server. So the way that you would do that is by on GitHub coming over here and clicking on this plus icon and going new repository. So we're going to call this my new MTA server, and we'll leave that as public, and we'll just create the repository. So here it's going to give us some explanation on how to actually set up our Git repository. So we've already done this git init step. So the next step is going to be adding some actual contents into our Git repository. So if you had done git init on an actual server that you had already been working on, so say you did episode 1 and 2 already and you want to initialize that as a repository and push it up, what you're going to go ahead and do is just do git add, and then a period means just add everything in this current directory and below. So because we're at the top level of our Git repository, this is just going to git add everything. And then once we've done git add this directory, what we're going to go ahead and do is create a commit, adding everything to my repository. Now mine failed because I didn't actually have anything in the directory. So I'll just go ahead and create a sample file so that we can see what's going on. So if I check git status, I can see that I've changed this file here. And what we're going to go ahead and do is git add dot git commit, and then adding all of my files to git. And if we try to git push, which is how to send something to the remote, we'll notice that it fails because there is no push destination. So if we come back over to GitHub, we need to add a remote. So we do this by copying this line here, and you'll notice that this chunk is basically the same as the one that we had previously set up for the MTA tutorial repository. It's just now pointing to this repository. So we're going to add a remote origin, my new MTA server, and we're just going to paste that in there. And once we've done that, we should be able to git push, and then we're going to say we want to push to the remote of origin master. Master is the initial branch that you would use for your changes until you want to branch off and do separate things because you have multiple developers. For now, let's not worry about any of that. Just focus on pushing to master. So now that we've done that, let's come back over here and we'll refresh this page. And now we have our README. So now that you've done this for your MTA server, let's go ahead and jump back to mine that actually has MTA code in it. You can read your commits here, and every time you make changes on your server, you'll just come over here, you'll check git status to see what the changes are that you've made. Use git add period to add your changes to the commit, and then you're going to git commit with a message of whatever message you want to use, your message here, and then you're going to git push, and it will push up to your remote origin master. Now that you have a basic understanding of Git, let's jump back over here. And what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you have grasped these changes on how to set up vehicle rotation. So what we did here was we grabbed the rotation of the player, and the player being the player that executed this create vehicle command. And then we passed it into the database command that we ran to create the vehicle. And then when we created the vehicle, it accepts these 3 arguments after x, y, z of the rotations x, y, and z coordinates. And then down here, what we've done, let's just expand this so that we see what function we're in. In our load all vehicles function, when we're loading the vehicles, we are pulling the vehicle's rotation x, y, and z coordinates out of the database and using them to respawn that vehicle when we start our resource. And down here, when we're handling the resource stopping, what we've done is we've grabbed the vehicle's current rotation and we update that in the database, setting the vehicle's rotation to be the current vehicle rotation so that when we start our resource again, we get that new rotation. Down here, I created a database schema at the top level just so that you can see what the schema looks like for how I've actually created all of these columns and stuff. So you can refer back to this if your database is ever out of sync with mine. You can just drop your database, run this script, and get back to square one. So you can see here that I've added rotation x, y, and z as columns. They're all decimal values that cannot be null. They have to be filled in. And then what I want you to do is I want you to jump back to the MTA tutorial commits, and I want you to look at this creating a foundational ACL file. So what I want you to do is click view on this ACL file and then click raw right here. And what you're going to do is just copy this and paste it into your acl.xml file. So your acl.xml file is located in your server directory at mods deathmatch acl.xml. So we're just going to open up our code and drop this in here. And what we're going to do is just override the whole thing with what I just set up. Don't worry too much about this file right now. In the next episode, we're going to dive into how to authenticate a user and then how to give them administrative rights using this acl.xml file. That's going to be it for this one, guys. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.